Well, hey, hope you're doing well this weekend, and thanks again for joining us for Ada Bible Church Online. Just grateful for this time that we get to have together. And I wonder if you were able to join us last weekend for a conversation about our city with Pastor Jeff. We pushed pause on our series on wisdom on the book of Proverbs just to talk about race in our city and our hearts. And just if you missed this conversation, please go back and watch it. I just think it's so important for our church right now. And this weekend, we're going to jump back into our series on Proverbs called The Way of the Wise. But just want to let you know, we will return to this conversation about race in our hearts and the role of the church. And so just be aware as we move forward in the next weeks and months, we're looking forward to returning to that conversation. But as we jump back into Proverbs, something to recognize is on the weekend of April 17 and 18 is when we kicked off this series called The Way of the Wise. And it was at that time that we just invited everybody to read through the book of Proverbs in this thing we're calling the Wisdom Challenge. And this coming week marks kind of the finish line of this thing. And so if you joined with us at the very beginning, you have now read through the book of Proverbs 2 full times, and that is pretty awesome. And so congratulations. It took a lot of effort and discipline. And to those of you who kind of joined in the process, thank you so much for reading through the book of Proverbs with us. And, we were planning on wrapping up this series kind of at the end of June, but we've decided to extend it for a few more weeks into July. It feels like these conversations still have good traction and just leading to good conversations between us during the week. And so with that said, I want to invite you to do something, and this might sound a little crazy, but extra credit assignment on the Wisdom Challenges. As we extend this series, I just invite you to take another pass through the book of Proverbs. And I just think that another reading would just open us up for God to speak to us in a very deep way as we glean more and more from reading the Proverbs. And so I just invite you to do that as we continue on in the way of the wise. And today, as we jump into my message, I just want to begin with a story from my early 20s. Back in the day when I was dating Katie, who I'm married to now, there were seasons in our dating relationship when I lived in Grand Rapids and she lived in Des Moines, where she grew up. And I love hanging out with Katie. I do now and I did back then. And so every opportunity that I got, I would drive over to Des Moines on the weekends to spend time with her. And if you've ever made the drive, it's really not too difficult. Once you get south of the Michigan border, you pretty much just head straight west. It's about 8 hours, really pretty easy. Well, except for one particular weekend that I took the trip. You see, I was listening to a football game. University of Michigan football game, and something you might not know about me is I'm pretty into the Michigan Wolverines football team. And so I was so into this particular game that I missed exits, and I took different highways, and I paid tolls without even realizing it until eventually I got just about to this point right here. Just a note, I'm not really a geography guy, but I don't even think that Wisconsin borders Iowa. So I had gone far to the north, well out of my way, and I just got to this point where I said, how did I get here? I mean, really, I was not paying attention. Also, I'm in this place I had no desire to be in, added hours on to my trip. How did I get here? And the thing is, I had that moment on that trip driving to Des Moines, and we have these moments in our lives where we just look around and we go, how did I even get here? This is not where I wanted to end up. And so I want to talk today about undesired destinations and how we end up in the places that we end up. And so we're going to be spending our time in the book of Proverbs, and I want to show you a kind of a breakdown of the book. We've shown this a few times during this series, but not all the Proverbs are the same. Here in the Proverbs of Solomon, we often get these like 2-line pithy powerful, compact statements. But here in the first section of Proverbs, where we're going to be spending our time today, you get these like longer, almost like mini sermons or lectures, and they come in the form of a father speaking to his sons, describing the virtues of wisdom. And this is where we're going to be in chapter 7. Solomon, he tells this story. It's a very vivid story that describes for us, I think, in really helpful ways, why we end up in the places that we end up and how we can avoid them. And so this question, how did I get here? Can we talk about this? It's like being on the bathroom scale and you look down at the number and you just go, how? How did I get here? And in this case, it might have something to do with 3 months of quarantine being stuck at home. But it also happens sitting at the kitchen table with bills spread out around you that represent just growing debts. How did I get here? This is not where I wanted to be. It happens sitting in a counselor's office as you describe an embarrassing addiction. How did I get here? This is not what I wanted. It happens laying on the basement couch where you be sleeping again and where you've been sleeping all week. It's like, what happened to our marriage? And how did we get here? I want to talk about these questions, and I want to explore this story that Solomon's going to share with us. And I just believe if we can dial into this, if we're willing to open our hearts and receive the truths that are presented in this story, it could save us a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, and a whole bunch of regret. And so here's where we're headed today. Just 3 ways that we end up in undesired space, these places that make us go, how did I get here? I never wanted to be here in the first place. And so let's jump into the story. It begins in verse 6 of chapter 7. Solomon presents the setting of this story. It says, "At the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice." And I don't exactly know what's going on here, but I just have this image in my head. You know, Solomon, he was a king, and I imagine he lived in a palace. And so I just picture a palace that's probably above the city and him looking down and observing his people. And he sees this one particular scene that catches his eye. And so here it goes, verse 7. "I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men a youth who had no sense." And so the main character in this story is a young man who's among the simple, among the young men. And it kind of sounds like Solomon's kind of slamming him, like putting him down, like here's a dumb guy. But that's not what he's saying. You see, he's describing a type of person, a character that we find in the book of Proverbs that's called the simple. And we've run into some of these characters already. I mean, we've talked all throughout the series about the wise person. And this is sort of like the goal of the book of Proverbs. This is the type of person that we want to become, the person who pursues wisdom, who pursues the way of God. But there's also the fool, who's like the anti-hero in the book of Proverbs. It's the one who rejects wisdom and rejects the way of God. And we've even spent a little time with a character called the mocker, or some translations call this person the scoffer. And this is like the fool on steroids. Not only do they reject wisdom, but they think you're an idiot for even bringing it up. And then, of course, now we are running into a fourth character, a fourth type of person called the simple. And what does it mean to be among the simple, like this main character that our story is describing for us? Well, I think perhaps the clearest picture that we get in Proverbs of what it means to be simple comes from chapter 27. Let's check it out. The prudent, and that's a synonym for the wise, the prudent see danger and they take refuge. But the simple, here's our type of person, they keep going and pay the penalty. Now, the question is, why in the world would someone just keep going and pay the price in this way? And the key word is right here. The prudent see danger. The wise person, they recognize the danger. But a simple person, they just don't even see it. And it's not because they're not smart. It's not because they're dumb. It's because they've never been in this situation before. They don't even realize that they're in danger. They're inexperienced. Perhaps that's the best way to describe what it means to be simple. And so there are times in life where we just look around and we go, how did I get here? I never wanted to be in this place. And one of the reasons we find ourselves in undesired places, undesired destinations is right here. We wander into them. We had no intention of it. We didn't know. We just wandered into it because we're among the simple. And I think we all know what this feels like, because some of us are paying off debt that we accumulated in our 20s. And we just didn't understand what was happening. We didn't grasp the situation. We just wandered into that trouble. And others of us, we're still battling destructive habits that we picked up in our teenage years. And we just didn't get it. We didn't understand what was happening. We wandered into that situation because we were simple, as the Proverbs say. And some of us carry deep regrets from decades ago. Again, because we just didn't understand what was going on. Often, we wander into these undesired destinations because we just don't see the signs of danger. And so maybe you're thinking, okay, so it's young people. Young people are simple because they're inexperienced. And often that is true. And it's not a slam on you if you're watching and you're young. I think it's just an opportunity to recognize, okay, there's a whole lot of life I haven't seen. And there's wisdom in saying, maybe I don't know everything that's going on here. But it's not just young people who are among the simple. I would argue that anytime we find ourselves in new territory, uncharted territory, that we are among the simple. Think about it. Those of you who are pregnant with your first child, this is uncharted territory. This is new space. You are among the simple. If you're engaged, about to become married, about to buy your first house, this is new territory. You're among the simple. If you're unemployed for the first time in your adult life, and that's a lot of us right now, you're in new territory. You are among the simple. And so it's not just young people. All of us in different spaces in our lives will have to say, listen, I think I am among the simple here. And when you're in that space, there's just a danger of not recognizing the trouble that you might be headed into because you've never seen it before. And so how do we avoid this? How do we keep ourselves from just wandering into some undesired destination that we never wanted to be in? And the answer to that question is 2 words: pay attention. Check out this proverb. When a mocker is punished, the simple gain wisdom. The idea is when someone in your life makes a mistake, makes a bad decision, and they suffer the consequences, there is wisdom in going, okay, noted, not doing that. I see how that played out. I am not doing that. The simple can gain wisdom by paying attention to the mistakes of others. And then secondly, from the same proverb, by paying attention to the wise, they, the simple, get knowledge. You see, there's an opportunity to seek out and listen to wise voices in our lives when we find ourselves in simple space. When you don't know what's going on, when you're in new territory, there's wisdom in just texting somebody, calling somebody. Hey, you're a parent and you seem to have it reasonably together. Hey, you guys are married and, I could picture myself having a relationship like you someday. Or, hey, you went through a season of unemployment and you're not bitter and you kind of picked yourself back up and got back on the horse. Could we talk? Would you be willing to share some of what you've learned? There's an opportunity to listen to the wise and gain wisdom. It helps us from wandering into to trouble. And so when we find ourselves in these places and we just go, man, how did I get here? One of the reasons is that we wander into it. But it's not the only way that we find ourselves in undesired destinations. Back to Solomon's story, he begins to describe for us what this young man is getting himself into. So back to Proverbs 7. He, this young man, main character in our story, he was going down the street near her corner. Now, just an observation. Her corner usually isn't in a good part of town. Okay, walking along in the direction of her house. Pay attention to the details in this story. Solomon is painting for us some danger signs. Now he begins to hammer on an important detail, the time of day. Check this out. At twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in, he's just hammering on this. It was nighttime. It was nighttime. Bad part of town, bad time of day. He's like, there is danger written all over this thing. What is this young man doing in this situation? It reminds me of watching a TV show or a movie and the character is about to open the door and you know what's behind the door. Everybody knows what's behind the door. There are danger signs all over the place. Can this character not hear the ominous music? And so you almost like jump off the couch like, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't open the door. And he opens the door and suffers the consequences. Same deal here. You see, here's the thing. There are times that we find ourselves in space and we just go, how did I get here? I never wanted this. And sometimes it's because we wander into it, but other times, it's because we ignore the danger. There are danger signs all over the place, but we just choose to ignore them. And we do this. We find ourselves in these kinds of situations. It's like he has a history of drinking too much. And yet, it's Friday night. He's at the bar with a group of people that typically drink too much. And it's like there are danger signs all over this thing. But he's ignoring those signs. And her credit card balance, it's not good. But she's at the mall. And she doesn't need anything from the mall, but she's at the mall. And typically when she's at the mall, she will buy something from the mall. It's like there are danger signs all over this thing, but she's ignoring those danger signs. And he has this habit of looking at things on the internet that he really shouldn't be looking at. But he's at home alone with his phone, scrolling through, surfing the web, and it's like there are danger signs all over the place here, but he's ignoring them. And she's attracted to him, and he is not her husband. And she has a friend that's even called her out on it. Hey, this doesn't look right. What's going on here? Oh, no, it's nothing. And yet she's been texting with him all weekend, and the conversation is progressively going deeper and getting more personal. There are danger signs all over this thing, but she's ignoring the danger. Sometimes we end up in these undesired destinations because we choose to ignore the danger signs. And when things blow up and something in our life breaks, we honestly say, I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt them. I never meant to blow up my marriage. I never meant to derail my career or wreck my personal finances. I didn't mean for this to happen. And we mean it. We didn't want it. But here's something we talk about all the time around here that's very true, and it's this. Look, we get to choose our behaviors. We get to choose what we say and what we do, but we don't get to choose the consequences. We don't get to choose who gets hurt and for how long and at what level, and we don't get to choose what's going to break in our lives because of the behavior. And I got to tell you, this story that Solomon's telling, it doesn't end well. And hey, we're an Ada Bible Church Home Edition, and a lot of families are watching together, so I'll keep this thing PG, but this woman she comes out and she talks to this young man and says, hey, my husband's not home. We should hang out. And he follows her. And it doesn't end well. And Solomon describes for us in very vivid detail the outcome of this situation. Let's check it out. He says, all at once he followed her, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces his liver. That does not sound pleasant at all. And he's not done. Like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. This bad decision will cost this young man dearly. And that's not what he wanted. And it's not what he intended, but it's what happens. And here's the deal. If you find yourself heading in a dangerous direction, ignoring danger signs, you're probably not going to take an arrow to the liver. I'm just saying it's probably not going to happen. But it is going to cost you something. It will cost you something. And you don't get to choose what it is, because we don't get to choose the consequences. It might cost you your reputation. It might cost you career opportunity. It might cost you a relationship. It will cost you something. When I was in college, I had a great friend. I mean, one of the best friends I ever had. And just this weird phase of my life, I said some things, I did some things, and I just ignored the danger signs of what I was doing. And I wrecked this friendship. And this is a guy that I should have been the best man in his wedding. He should have been the best man in my wedding. We should have been journeying through life together. Our kids should have known each other. And I wrecked it. And I couldn't fix it. There was nothing I could do to put it back together. You see, we get to choose the behavior. We don't get to choose the consequences. And understand, it will cost you something. And so just a question I have, maybe a question that you might be wrestling with as well, is just, why do we do these things? I mean, really? Why do we ignore the danger signs and just end up in these places where we go, I didn't want this. This is never what I want. Why do we do that? I mean, are we dumb? Are we stupid? Why do we end up doing this often over and over again? And Solomon has something to say about this, because he closes out his story. And it's like he turns toward his sons, looks them directly in the eyes, and begins to speak to them directly. And I want to read to you what he says. This comes from the tail end of chapter 7. He says, now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. This is important. Don't miss this. And he just goes off. Don't let your heart stray to her ways or stray to her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are like a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. And if I'm one of the boys, I'm going, okay, Dad, got it. Very clear, stay away from that woman. We got it. We will not set foot on her path. Thank you, Dad. But that's not what he said. Let's look at this again. He said, do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. He doesn't say don't set foot on her path. He says don't let your heart stray into her path. And here's the deal. So often, the pathway to these undesired destinations that we end up in, it begins in here. It begins in here with the thoughts that we allow ourselves to think and what we allow our minds to dwell on and what we choose to daydream about. You see, the truth is often we end up in undesired destinations because of this. This is the third way right here. We follow our hearts. we follow our hearts straight into those undesired destinations. And there is a truth that is so important that we need to recognize and respect, and it's right here. Your feet will eventually follow your heart. Eventually, your life will catch up to where your heart is at. And I guess all I'm saying is that when we find ourselves in those places and we go, how did I even get here? I mean, I never wanted to be here. And sometimes the answer is just this. Your heart has been here for a while now, and your feet just finally caught up. Because our feet follow our hearts. And this is just the way that it works. And some of us have experienced this. I mean, you allow yourself to dwell on the anger of what they said to you and just how it made it feel. And you go, oh, if I would have said this. Or oh, I you know what I could do? I could take what she said and then tell them and that, oh. And we just run through these revenge scenarios. And we do this over time, and eventually someday we wake up and we look around and we just recognize, I am a bitter, angry person. It's like your feet finally caught up to your heart. And what we dwell on when it's, the next thing, oh, after this car, I want to get that car, and, after this house, then we're going to get this bigger house, and yeah, I'm in this position, but when I get that position and that salary and this relationship, but what I really want is that relationship. Eventually, over time, we wake up someday and we just recognize, how did I get here? I am a discontent, unsatisfied person. And we say to ourselves, I am the type of person, I would never have an affair. But it's kind of fun to daydream about it. And here's the truth that we need to respect and recognize. Eventually, our feet will follow our hearts. And so often, when we find ourselves in those places, we can recognize, man, my heart's been here for a while now. I just finally caught up with my actions. And maybe you're thinking, listen, hold on. I thought I was supposed to listen to my heart. And I thought I was supposed to trust my God and, follow my truth. I mean, what's up with this? Well, my answer to that would just be everything that we see wrong in the world, all the brokenness, all the pain, all the rejection of God's of authority, the same stuff that's wrong out there is wrong in here. And it's the effects of sin, the rebellion against God in us and in everybody, that exists in our hearts. And if that is true, then you can't always trust your heart. And why do we ignore the danger signs? Why do we just plow ahead? Because our hearts are deceitful. And there are times that our hearts will trick us. Ooh, if you get that, then you'll be happy. Oh, what you really need is this. Our hearts deceive us into ignoring the danger signs. And so I would argue, you know what? You really can't always trust your heart. It's risky. You could end up in one of those places where you just go, this is not what I wanted. How did I get here? An undesired destination. And so what do? I mean, what do you do if you really can't trust your heart all the time? Well, I want to show you one more proverb. And this is where we'll end our time. Proverbs chapter 3, again from that section where Solomon's teaching his sons. He says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. No, don't trust your heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And how do you do that? And lean not on your own understanding. Listen, don't trust your own thinking, your own attractions and feelings and desires. Don't trust them. Don't lean on them. Instead, he says, in all your ways, in all your thinking, in all your acting, in all your dwelling, submit to him, surrender to him, and he will make your paths straight. Submit your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, your attractions, take all that and surrender them to the authority of Jesus, and what? He will make your paths straight. It's like he will keep you from those undesired destinations. He will keep you on a good path. if we are willing to evaluate our thoughts, critique our feelings and attractions, just go, wait a second, does this line up with what God has said? Does this line up with his character? If we're willing to do this, Solomon says he will make your paths straight. He will help you avoid those undesired destinations. And friends, here's the deal. Life is hard enough. I mean, we are living through a pandemic, for crying out loud. Life is challenging. I mean, we face disappointment and loss. We go through seasons of grief. Life is hard enough. We don't need to add to the difficulty by wandering into, by blazing into, by listening to our hearts and ending up in these painful, undesired destinations where we experience regret and heartache and, oh, why did I do that? And I never wanted this. And so instead, trust him with all of your heart. Don't trust your own thinking, but surrender all of that to him, and he will help keep your paths straight. But I just recognize some of us are probably looking around at our lives and going, oh man, I've got a long way to go. I mean, there's a few areas here where I'm just out of sync. And let me just remind you that our feet follow our hearts. And that when you invite God in, and when you surrender your thoughts and your feelings and desires to him, he is at work transforming you, transforming your heart, and your actions and your words and your life will begin to follow that. And I just want to encourage you with the words of the Apostle Paul to the church in Philippi in the first century. He said, well, let's look at it together. He said, he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Just understand, there is a God who loves you, is for you, and is at work in your heart transforming you, and he's not gonna stop until Jesus returns. And understand, your feet will follow your heart, and so trust that work. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. This is the way of wisdom. It's the way of Jesus, and it's the path to life. So my hope for you this week is that you would submit to him your thoughts, your feelings, your attractions, and that you would experience him leading you toward life. Friends, thanks for joining us this week. So looking forward to next weekend when we get to gather together again for Ada Bible Church Online. We'll see you.